Elena Garcia, 62 years old, Mexican woman. Neatly trimmed gray hair, wearing a simple silver gray wool coat over a plain, high-necked, off-white cotton shirt. No jewelry except for a small, old wedding ring. Photographed at eye level, sitting upright in a wooden chair, hands resting calmly on her lap, eyes looking directly into the camera and recounting her own story. Lips slightly pursed as if suppressing emotion. In a room indoors, soft, warm morning light shines from the side, dawn around 6 a.m. The weather is fresh and quiet, a surreal cinematic realism. At 5 a.m., I jolted awake, not from my usual alarm, but from the relentless buzzing of the phone on my nightstand. It shook violently, over and over, cutting through the quiet of dawn like something urgent was happening. A sharp pain shot through my right leg, climbed up my spine, and reminded me of the heavy white cast that wrapped around it. I shifted, gritting my teeth to stifle a groan, and stretched through the pain to grab the phone thrashing on the wood surface. The screen lit up, casting a cold blue glow. A stream of unread messages filled the group chat called, ironically, the Happy Miller family. Every message was from my daughter-in-law, Sophie. The last message hit me in the face, bold and brutal on the notification bar. No greeting, no warmth. Since you're crippled, just stay home. We're going to Europe for a month. I sat up too fast. Pain exploded in my leg, nearly forcing a scream out of my throat, but I choked it down. I unlocked the phone, rereading the message again and again, praying my vision was blurry, praying this was some twisted dream. It wasn't. The black letters stayed there, clear and cruel against the white background. Above that message were photos. Sophie and my son, Charles, grinning ear to ear, loading designer luggage into the trunk of a taxi. My heart pounded, thudding so hard it echoed in my chest. My hands shook as I called Charles. The phone rang once. Twice. Then nothing. No answer. I tried Sophie. Same result. Only the cold voice of voicemail responded. Panic surged through me. With all the strength I had left, I grabbed the edge of the bed and nightstand and pushed myself up, balancing on one leg. A wave of dizziness made everything spin. I had to stand still for a few seconds to steady myself. I hobbled forward, each step a struggle. My hand gripped the hallway wall as I inched toward the living room. The house was silent. Terrifyingly silent. Any other day at this hour, the coffee machine would already be humming in the kitchen, the morning news anchor's voice filling the room. But now, the only sound was the low hum of the fridge. The living room was empty. The two large silver suitcases that had been in the corner last night were gone. Charles's windbreaker, the one he always tossed on the sofa after work, was gone too. It was like every trace of life had been sucked out of the house. My eyes landed on the coffee table. Next to a half-finished glass of water, still fogged with condensation, there were a few crumpled bills left behind, tossed carelessly, as if that was all I was worth. I hobbled closer. My hands trembled as I picked up the glass. Inside were a crumpled $20 bill and a worn-out one. $21 in total. I froze, staring at the money in my hand. A chill ran down my spine, spreading through every limb. $21 for an entire month. That amount wasn't even enough to cover the delivery fee for one bottle of painkillers, let alone food, utilities, or any of the risks a 60-year-old woman with a broken leg might face. They didn't leave me money, they left me charity. And that charity came with the message that my life was only worth that much. Shaking, I turned back to the sofa and collapsed onto the cushion. I picked up my phone, the keyboard lit up, waiting for a reply. My fingers were stiff and numb, but I still managed to type 2 words. A quiet, defeated lie, a reflex of submission that had seeped into my bones after all these years. All right then. I hit send. Seconds later, I saw Sophie and Charles's status on the messaging app flip to inactive. They had turned off their phones. Or boarded the plane. They had severed the last thread of connection, leaving me alone in this concrete cage. I slumped back on the couch, eyes locked on my leg wrapped in a stark white cast. In that desperate silence, the memory of 2 days ago surged back, vivid, as if it had just happened. I was lying on this same couch, letting the quiet swallow me whole. My eyes wandered to the photo of my late husband, Peter, sitting proudly on the mantel. He was smiling in the picture, a gentle, warm smile under a dusty hard hat. The kind of smile that had always made me feel safe, no matter how rough the storm. 2 days ago, in this very living room, I had stood on a wobbly wooden stool, trying to reach up and wipe the top of the kitchen cabinet. That morning, Sophie had made a face about a tiny grease stain she spotted while eating breakfast. She spoke with irritation in her voice, saying a few of her elite friends would be stopping by for tea before their trip to Europe, and she didn't want the house looking messy and filthy. I told her I'd clean it, even though my legs had grown weak with age. I wanted to please my daughter-in-law. I wanted the house to look perfect for their friends. But then the stool slipped on the slick tile floor. I only remember a sharp crack echoing in my ear, and then a blinding pain, like someone had smashed my shin bone with a sledgehammer. I remember Charles grumbling the entire drive to the ER. He didn't ask if I was in pain. He just kept muttering that I had ruined their prep schedule, that now they had to waste time at the hospital instead of shopping for their trip. "Couldn't you have waited to fall until after we left?" That's what Sophie said. She stood with her arms crossed, watching the elderly doctor examine the x-rays and confirm I had a fractured tibia. She said it casually, without malice, but the coldness in her voice made me shiver. Then they left me alone at the hospital so they could finish packing, while I was left to deal with a freshly casted leg on my own. I held up my hand in front of my face, blocking my view of the ceiling. The thick calluses. The knuckles, wide and rough, worn down by years of labor. The wrinkled, age-spotted skin. I remembered the smell of freshly grilled corn cakes filling the tiny kitchen of our old rented apartment. These hands had shaped thousands, maybe tens of thousands of them, waking up at 3 in the morning just to have them ready for the weekend flea market. I saved every single penny, hiding them under the drawer liner. These hands had been blistered by the oven, so sore at times they couldn't even hold a spoon, but they helped lay the first stones of this home. I remembered those freezing winter nights, walking 2 miles through heavy snow to wash dishes at the local restaurant. The scalding steam, the cheap cleaning chemicals that peeled my skin and stung like hell. But every time I got that paycheck envelope, I smiled. I thought about getting another double-pane window to block the wind, a solid oak door for the dream house Peter and I were building together. Peter worked his bones off at the dusty construction site, and I scraped together what I could with all the little things. This house isn't just bricks and mortar. It's our sweat, our tears, our youth. In my mind, I glanced at Sophie's hands. Long, slender fingers, pale, smooth skin, perfectly manicured nails with glittering rhinestones. Those hands were always holding a glass of expensive wine or scrolling through the latest phone. She once complained that scrubbing a greasy pan would ruin her $50 manicure. And so, I quietly washed it for her. My eyes drifted toward the picture of the Virgin Mary above the fireplace, right next to Peter's photo. It was the only thing my mother left me before she passed. The day Peter and I moved into this house, I stood in front of that painting, folded my hands, and made a silent promise. I promised to keep this place a real home, a solid refuge for our family, no matter how hard the storms outside might rage. A loud gurgling sound from my stomach snapped me out of my thoughts. Hunger pulled me back to the present, to the empty living room. I am not some useless old cripple, like my daughter-in-law hints at. I am the one who built this place. I am its owner. And now, I have to survive in my own house. The hunger clawed at me like a wild animal tearing through my insides. I had to eat something. Anything. I gritted my teeth and dragged myself step by step into the kitchen, clinging to a fragile hope that maybe I had imagined what I saw earlier. I gripped the refrigerator handle, took a deep breath, and opened it. The cold LED light revealed what was left. Plain, raw truth. A takeout box of old Chinese food, with only a bit of sour-smelling sauce left. A shriveled carrot, its skin wrinkled, tossed in the veggie drawer. Half a tub of Greek yogurt, the fancy kind Sophie liked to eat in the mornings to stay in shape. And a single egg, lying all alone in a bare plastic tray. I opened the freezer. It was completely empty. All the meat, fish, and frozen food I had stocked up on last week were gone. Sophie probably took them to give to her mom, or threw them out to clean the freezer before leaving. The only things left were an ice tray and a half-eaten tub of mint chocolate chip ice cream, covered in cookie crumbs. That bitter feeling of despair started rising in my throat. I turned to the pantry, where I usually kept pasta, rice, cereal, and canned goods. That was my emergency stash. I grabbed the handle to open it. It wouldn't move. I bent down to get a better look. My heart skipped a beat. The old lock was gone. In its place was a shiny brand new brass lock. Sophie. It had to be her. She always complained that I organized things all wrong, and that I messed up her perfect pantry. And now, she locked it. She actually locked away my food before getting on a plane to Paris. A wave of humiliation hit me so hard it knocked the wind out of me. My eyes filled with tears, but my thirst was stronger than the pain. I went back to the table, grabbed the glass of water from earlier, and drank it all in one go. I had to save what I could. I hobbled to the bathroom and filled a large bottle from the faucet. That would be my drinking water for the day. Maybe even tomorrow. Suddenly, I had to go to the bathroom. I looked around. Where was the hospital wheelchair? Nowhere to be seen. The crutches? Gone too. Then I remembered Charles last night. He had tossed them in the garage after carrying me inside, muttering that he'd bring them in later. But in all the excitement of their trip, they forgot. And the garage door was heavy, with a spring lock. There was no way I could open it with my leg like this. I had no choice. I bit my lip and dropped myself onto the freezing tile floor. I pressed my hands against the ground and used my one good leg to slowly drag my body forward. The rug scratched my skin. The pain from my broken leg flared up with every movement, hitting all the way to my head. The living room and the bathroom were just a few steps apart, but it felt like the longest, most humiliating journey of my life. I didn't even feel human. I felt like a wounded animal just trying to survive in its own den. After struggling to pull myself up onto the toilet, and then dragging myself back out, I was completely exhausted. I collapsed on the living room floor, gasping, drenched in sweat. Hours passed in silence. My stomach started to twist in pain. I looked at the open milk carton in the fridge. I picked it up and checked the date. It had expired yesterday. I knew it wasn't safe. But hunger and thirst clouded my judgment. I sniffed it. It smelled a little sour, but I told myself it was fine, just a few sips. I drank a couple big gulps. The taste was gross, off. But the cold milk felt good against my dry throat. About an hour later, the consequences hit. A sharp, stabbing cramp tore through my lower stomach. I curled up on the floor, clutching my belly. Cold sweat broke out all over me. The pain was so intense, I couldn't move, couldn't stand. All I could do was lie there, quietly groaning in an empty house. I knew I had made a huge mistake. Curled up on the floor, I could hear the neighbor's lawn mower humming, the kids next door laughing and playing outside. Life was going on, bright and normal, just beyond these brick walls. But no one knew what I was going through in here. I could have yelled. I could have called out for Marie, the kind neighbor. But shame, my pride as a mother, the fear that someone would think my son was neglecting me, kept my mouth shut. In the middle of unbearable pain, one thought flashed through my mind like a final lifeline. I had to call Charles. My own son. Surely he wouldn't let his mother slowly waste away like this. He's just careless, not cruel. Right? Has anyone here ever felt like they'd become an outsider, a burden, inside the very house they built? Please share your story with me, so I know I'm not alone. I used every ounce of strength left in me to drag myself toward the sofa, where I had dropped my phone earlier. The screen was still faintly lit. My trembling finger tapped the video call icon next to Charles's name. The phone rang. It rang for a long time, so long I almost gave up. Then the call connected. Charles's face appeared on the tiny screen, bright, tanned. But the image was shaky, constantly moving. He was walking. Behind him were charming old buildings and crowds of people going back and forth. The sound of car horns and cheerful voices spilled through the speaker, completely at odds with the deathly silence in my room. "Mom?" Charles's voice came through, sounding annoyed and impatient. He leaned closer to the screen to hear better. "What's going on?" "It's afternoon here. The weather's beautiful. We're walking along the Seine." The image shifted, and Sophie appeared on screen. She was wearing trendy sunglasses that covered half her face, bright red lipstick, smiling and giving me a half-hearted wave. She leaned in to whisper something in Charles's ear, and they both chuckled. "Charles, honey." My voice was faint, trembling from the stomach pain that was tearing through me. I don't have anything to eat. My stomach hurts so bad. The milk's gone bad." Charles frowned. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by clear irritation. "Oh, for God's sake, this again? Mom, we're on vacation. It's our second honeymoon. We're having a good time. Can you please stop complaining? There's food in the fridge, and my credit card's in the desk drawer. Handle it. You're a grown woman, not a child who needs help with everything." "No, you don't understand," I tried to explain, tears now pouring down my cheeks, hot and heavy. "The pantry's locked. I don't have the strength to cook. I fell. He cut me off, his voice cold and final. All right. I get it. Sophie and I need our space. Don't bother us anymore. Call back later. The call ended abruptly. The phone screen went black, reflecting my tear-streaked, drained, and desperate face. I dropped the phone onto the carpet. A hollow, freezing emptiness spread over me, worse than any physical pain I'd felt. The final blow had landed. Not from a stranger, but from the child I once carried in my womb. The last fragile connection had been severed, without mercy. That night, the rain came pouring down. An unusually fierce summer storm. The wind howled in bursts, pounding hard against the glass windows. I lay curled up on the floor, drifting off from sheer exhaustion and pain. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a loud, jarring bang. A gust of wind had blown open the latch of the living room window. The window swung wide, slamming against the wall. Rain came in sideways, drenching a corner of the floor and soaking my favorite curtain. With the instinct of a homeowner, I couldn't just let the house be ruined. Gritting my teeth, I forced myself up to close it. I couldn't see clearly in the thick darkness. The dizziness from hunger was still there. My good leg slipped on the slick puddle of rainwater. I lost my balance. My whole body pitched forward. I landed face first on the floor. My head slammed into the sharp edge of the coffee table. I lay there, motionless in the dark. Cold rain splashed on my face through the wide-open window. Warm blood trickled down my temple. But strangely, I didn't feel pain anymore. For the first time in years, I felt completely numb. I don't know how long I was unconscious on the floor. When I opened my eyes, the faint light of dawn was creeping through the still open window. Pale sunlight hit the puddle on the floor and lit up my numb face. My head was pounding like a drum, and one side of my face was stuck to the damp, sticky rug. A violent cough burst up from my chest, snapping me back a little. I was shaking all over, not just from the bone-deep cold of my soaked clothes, but from total exhaustion. I had to get up. If I kept lying there, I'd die of pneumonia. I dragged myself inch by inch toward the nearby sofa. My hands clung to the leg of the couch, my fingernails digging into the fabric. I pushed with every bit of strength I had, trying to lift my heavy torso off the floor. My phone was lying face down on the carpet, just within reach. I grabbed it instinctively. The screen lit up, 40% battery left. With trembling fingers, I tapped the social media icon. A reflex, a desperate attempt to feel some kind of connection to the outside world. To escape this harsh reality. And that's when I saw it. Sophie's latest post, uploaded just a few hours ago. It was a stunning photo. Sophie and Charles standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, glowing bright gold against the Paris night. They were beaming, faces full of joy. Each held a fancy glass of champagne. Sophie's head rested lovingly on my son's shoulder. They looked so happy, so free, so fulfilled. But it was the short caption below the photo that froze my heart and killed whatever trace of motherly affection I had left. She wrote, "Finally rid of that dead weight and free to enjoy life. Paris is amazing. Dead weight." Those two words echoed over and over in my head, like a death knell. Louder than the dripping rain outside, louder than the ringing in my ears. I'm not Mom. I'm not Helen. I'm not the woman who sacrificed her whole life for her husband and kids. In their eyes, I'm just a burden. A piece of trash they need to throw away so they can enjoy their lives. I looked down at my body. My casted leg was covered in mud and rainwater. My pajamas were soaked, disheveled, and smelled musty. A bruise was forming on my swollen temple, and suddenly, I realized a terrifying raw truth. If I had died here, last night, in this cold, empty house, they wouldn't have been sad, they wouldn't have mourned, they would have sighed in relief. They would have come back, thrown a fake funeral, and then quickly sold this house, the one Peter and I built brick by brick with sweat, tears, and blood. And with that money, they'd travel more, shop more, drink more wine. Something inside me cracked, snapped. But it wasn't the sound of heartbreak. It was the sound of my patience breaking. My tears stopped. The pain in my chest disappeared, replaced by a deadly silence. The stillness before the storm. I raised my hand and wiped my face dry with the back of my rough hand. My eyes no longer begged or looked weak. My silence over the past week wasn't strength, it was complicity. I had enabled their selfishness, their cruelty, by accepting it. I had taught them how to mistreat me by allowing it. I dragged myself to the small table by the chair, where I kept an old leather-bound phone book. My fingers didn't tremble anymore. They flipped through the yellowed pages with purpose, heading to the letter M, Marie Dubois, my neighbor of 30 years. The one I'd been avoiding lately, afraid she'd ask about my family. She knew everything that happened in this neighborhood. She was the local gossip queen. But more importantly, she had a brave heart and a deep hatred for injustice. I dialed her number. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Helen, why are you calling me at this hour? Is everything okay?" Marie's voice came through, loud and sharp, filled with surprise and concern. I took a deep breath. The air filled my lungs, cold but invigorating. My voice came out steady, no longer shaking, but cold, sharp, and full of authority. "Marie, are you home?" "Yes. I was just about to go water the roses." "Why?" "Don't water the plants," I said, each word firm and slow. "Bring your phone and come over now. I've got something to show you." The front doors unlocked. I hung up before she could ask another question. I tossed the phone aside. The game had changed. I was no longer the helpless victim lying on the floor waiting to die. I was preparing for a war. And this time, I'd be the one holding the weapon. At that moment, I asked myself, is a mother's sacrifice supposed to have no limits? If you were me, would you keep slowly fading away, or would you rise up? Give me your advice, because my battle is only just beginning. About 5 minutes after that fateful phone call, the doorbell rang repeatedly. I had to drag myself to the door, another grueling journey. But this time, something was beginning to burn inside me. When I finally managed to twist the lock and crack open the heavy oak door, Marie stormed in like a whirlwind. She froze, her mouth agape. "Oh, sweet Jesus, Helen! What happened to you?" She looked me over from head to toe. Her eyes lingered on the bruise, now turning color on my temple, the damp, foul-smelling pajamas, and my emaciated, bone-thin frame. Then she glanced around the house. The windows were wide open. The floor was soaked from the rain. Chaos and cold everywhere, clear signs of someone disabled, left alone, drowning in despair. I said nothing. My throat tightened. I just silently held out my phone, still displaying Sophie's flashy post from Paris. Marie squinted at the screen. I saw her facial muscles tense up. Her concern shifted to shock, then flared into pure rage. She muttered a French curse I knew she only used when she truly meant to damn someone. "That bitch," she hissed through clenched teeth. "And that bastard Charles too. They're both trash." That was all I needed to hear. Not pity, but allegiance. A pact was formed in that instant. Without hesitation, Marie sprang into action like a commander. She helped me into the bathroom, wiped me down, and found me clean, dry clothes. She shut all the windows tight, mopped the floor, and then grabbed her phone to call in reinforcements. 15 minutes later, 2 more friends from our little retirement squad arrived. Margaret, a retired military nurse built like a tank, and Susan, who owned the lushest vegetable garden in the neighborhood. Margaret came with a full medical kit. She didn't say much, just cleaned and dressed the wound on my head with calm, practiced hands. Susan brought a steaming pot of chicken and vegetable stew, along with a loaf of freshly baked bread, still warm from the oven. For the first time in nearly a week, I had a real meal. The warmth of the soup spread through my stomach, waking up cells I thought were already dying. While I was eating, Marie went out to her car and came back with a spiral-bound notebook and a black ink pen. She slammed it down on the table in front of me and said, firm as steel, "All right. From now on we're writing everything down. Not a single penny goes unaccounted for." And so, the debt ledger was born. I opened to the first page, carefully writing the opening lines with a hand still slightly shaking. June 1st. Charles and Sophie left for Europe. Money left behind, $21. Status, broken right leg, no wheelchair or crutches provided. Each day after that, with help from my fellow retirees, I documented everything in detail. Every receipt for painkillers Marie paid for. Every grocery list from Susan, labeled clearly as a food loan. The hours Margaret spent tending my wounds and helping me bathe. All dated, all signed by them. The notebook grew thicker, each day, heavy with proof. That night, my phone gave a soft ping, a message from Sophie, probably a bit of late guilt, or maybe just checking if the dead weight was still breathing. "Are you doing okay, Mom? Just checking in." Mrs. Marie was sitting across from me, sipping a cup of hot tea. She looked at me, one eyebrow raised knowingly. I looked back at her, then at my phone screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I didn't type a word, I just picked a simple yellow smiley face emoji. And hit send. Across the Atlantic, my daughter-in-law would probably breathe a sigh of relief, thinking the old fool was still quietly putting up with everything. But here, in the warmth of my own living room, Marie and I looked at each other. A cold, knowing smile spread across our lips. I picked up my pen and wrote the next line in my notebook. June 7. Received a check-in message from Sophie. Replied that everything was fine. As I recorded my strategic little lie, my eyes caught a glimpse of their latest photo. They were eating gelato by the Colosseum, looking carefree, glowing with joy. Fine. Enjoy it while it lasts. Because the storm is quietly building right here, in the house you left behind, and it's going to wipe everything clean when you come back. Week 3. My plan moved into its decisive phase. One sunny afternoon, Mrs. Marie's grandson, David, came to my house. He's a young lawyer with thick-framed glasses and a permanently serious expression. Marie had told him everything, and he agreed to help, for free. David sat across from me in the living room. Marie sat next to him, acting as senior advisor. I placed the now thick debt ledger on the table and slid it toward David. The young lawyer read through each page carefully, his brows knit tighter and tighter. He flipped through the medication receipts, the expense records, and the signed witness statements from neighbors. The air in the room grew heavy with anger. "Miss Helen," David finally said, his voice firm after a long silence. "This isn't just evidence of neglect. This could absolutely be classified as elder abuse under state law. We have a very solid case if you decide to take this to criminal court." I shook my head gently, my gaze drifting to the garden outside the window. "I don't want to put my children on trial, David. I don't want to see my son behind bars. I just want what's mine back. I want my house back. And most of all, I want my dignity back." I walked slowly into the bedroom and opened the old safe, hidden deep inside the closet. This was the heart of the house. I pulled out a worn, yellowed folder. The property deed, free and clear of any mortgage. My name, Helen Miller, and Peter Miller, side by side. I laid it on the table in front of David. "Help me do this." David nodded, understanding what I meant. He opened his laptop and started typing. The steady clatter of the keyboard filled the room, sounding like the starting shots of a battle. Document 1. Debt statement and emergency care reimbursement request. David had turned my handwritten debt ledger into an official legal document. It listed every expense, medicine, groceries, neighbors' transportation costs, and even a special care fee calculated by Nurse Margaret based on a professional rate. The total had climbed into the thousands. Document 2. Notice of termination of residency. David carefully explained that since Charles and Sophie had no formal lease agreement and hadn't contributed financially, I had every legal right, as the sole property owner, to ask them to leave, especially considering they had neglected even the most basic duties of care toward the homeowner. And the biggest surprise came with the third document. I told David about my plan. Thanks to Marie's wide network, she had quickly found a kind young couple, a school teacher and a firefighter, urgently looking for a place to rent. They were hardworking and trustworthy. Yesterday, David had brought them the lease agreement to sign. I slid the signed rental contract for the second and third floors over for David to review. "This goes into effect next month," I said, calmly but firmly. "I'm taking those rooms back." Once all the documents were neatly filed in a blue folder, I moved on to the final task. Marie and Susan helped me. We brought out the large, heavy-duty black trash bags, the kind used for yard waste. We entered Charles and Sophie's bedroom. I opened Sophie's closet. A wave of expensive perfume hit me, instantly bringing her smug expression to mind. Coldly, I grabbed every designer dress, every sharp high heel, and tossed them into the black bags. Then Charles' things. Gaming devices, business suits, same fate. We didn't fold anything. We didn't treat anything with care. We were simply clearing out trash from a living space. In the end, 6 large, stuffed black bags were lined up neatly in one corner of the living room, right by the front door. They sat there silently, dark and heavy, waiting for their owners. Everything was ready. The house was clean. The legal paperwork was on the table. I sat down and took a deep breath. At this stage in life, do you still have control of your property paperwork, or have you blindly handed everything over to your kids? Be careful. Those papers are your last shield of protection. Day 30. I knew they were coming back today. Their flight was due to land at 2 p.m. I wore a teal wool dress, my nicest and most formal outfit. My hair was neatly brushed and pinned into a bun. I sat upright in my usual armchair, like a queen on her throne. My leg was still in a cast, but the pain had eased. It was no longer a fatal weakness. Marie sat in the chair beside me, arms crossed, her expression as fierce as a loyal bodyguard. Lawyer David, dressed in a crisp business suit, sat in a single chair across from me, a leather folder resting perfectly on his lap. On the coffee table in front of me, there were only 3 items laid out like evidence: a blue folder, a $20 bill, and a crumpled $1 bill. Exactly at 4 in the afternoon, I heard the sound of a taxi's wheels crunching on the gravel outside. Then the engine shut off. Laughter and voices echoed in, and then, the rattle of a key in the lock, the door burst open. "Mom, we're home." Charles's voice rang out, cheerful, loud, and theatrical. Sophie and Charles walked in. Their skin was deeply tanned from the Mediterranean sun, bright smiles on their faces. Their hands were full of flashy shopping bags from luxury brands: Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Chanel. The scent of sunshine and wealth swept into the room. "Oh my God, I'm starving. Is there any hot soup, Mom?" Sophie said in that familiar whiny voice of hers. She didn't even glance at me as she spoke, taking off her oversized sunglasses. But then, their laughter stopped cold. They froze in the doorway. The bags in their hands swayed. Their eyes locked on the scene in front of them, stunned. There was no hot soup, no warm welcome, no frail old mother hobbling over to help with their bags. Their mother was sitting there with an unfamiliar kind of authority they had never seen before. Next to her was the nosy neighbor and a man in a black suit. Silence filled the room, heavy, suffocating. The only sound was the steady ticking of the old grandfather clock on the wall, counting down to judgment. What's going on here?" Charles stammered. The smile froze on his face, twisting awkwardly. He looked around, confused. "Who is this?" I didn't answer. I didn't blink. I simply lifted my arm and pointed directly at the blue folder, sitting alone on the table. Sophie reacted first. Her aggressive nature kicked in. She threw her purse to the floor with a thud, rushed over to the table, and snatched up the folder. Her heavily lined eyes scanned the pages quickly. I watched her expression shift, from surprise, to confusion, to pale shock, and finally to furious red. "What the hell is this?" she screamed, her shrill voice tearing through the air. "Debt statements? Notice of termination of residency? Rental contract? Are you insane?" She whipped around to face me, her eyes blazing like she was ready to tear me apart. No, this can't be happening. You're suing us? You're kicking us out right after we came back from vacation?" Charles rushed over, yanked the papers from his wife's hands, and skimmed through them. His sun-kissed face turned ghostly pale. He looked up at me, disbelief in his eyes. "Mom, you can't do this. We're family. How can you be so cold and calculating with your own children?" "Family?" My voice rang out. For the first time in the entire conversation, I finally spoke, cold as ice, cutting through every excuse. "Families don't leave their mother with $21 and a broken leg, Charles." At my sharp, chilling words, Charles and Sophie seemed to lose all sense of reason. Shame twisted into a kind of furious rage, an instinctive cover-up for guilt. Sophie started shouting, stomping her feet on the floor. Her voice turned shrill, throwing out one ridiculous accusation after another, that I was overreacting, that I was just a jealous, selfish old woman bitter about my children's happiness. "You're old and senile. We were only gone for a month." "Just 1 month," she screamed, her bright red finger jabbing toward my face. "We needed space. You should have been able to take care of yourself." Charles, seeing his wife getting worked up, turned to me. He used that condescending, slightly threatening tone he always used to control me in the past. "Mom, that's enough. You're upsetting Sophie. Stop this nonsense. Apologize to her. She's really sensitive right now. You're embarrassing the family in front of guests." He shot a nasty glance at David and Mrs. Marie. Mrs. Marie started to rise from her seat, ready to speak up, but I raised my hand to stop her. I remained seated, strangely calm. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply leaned down, reached into the woven basket next to my chair, and pulled out a small silver USB stick. I handed it to David, Charles and Sophie watched in confusion, their shouting suddenly silenced. David plugged the USB into a tablet he had already set on the table. He turned the screen toward my two children. "Take a look," David said flatly. The first video appeared. The footage was shaky, filmed from a hidden angle behind a bookshelf. It showed me crawling across the floor like an inchworm, trying to make it to the bathroom. The only sound was my labored breathing and the faint rustling of fabric dragging across the cold tile. Sophie's bright red face froze. The second video. Dimly lit, the only light coming from a street lamp outside the window. The screen shook violently, and then a dull thud echoed as I fell flat on the floor. After that, silence, just soft, pained moans and the steady patter of rain hitting the glass. Charles took a step back, his face turned pale, his lips trembling. The final video had been recorded by Mrs. Marie. It showed a close-up of a brand new padlock on the dry pantry, then slowly panned to the nearly empty fridge, lingering on an open yogurt cup and a single lonely egg. David shut off the tablet. The screen went black. The room fell silent again, but this time, it wasn't the silence of anger. It was the suffocating stillness of guilt and shame. I slowly used the armrest of the chair to push myself up. Even though my leg was still throbbing with pain, I forced myself to stand tall, head held high, facing them. I pointed at the folder on the table. "These are the bills for the month of care the neighbors gave me, in place of my own children. David will send a copy to your workplace if you don't pay up." I picked up the rental agreement. "And this is the lease for the second and third floors. A new couple is moving in this weekend. Those rooms are no longer yours." Finally, I pointed firmly at the black trash bags piled in the corner of the room. "Your things are in those bags over there. Everything you ever owned in this house is in there. Get out of my home. Now." Sophie opened her mouth like she was going to say something, but no words came out. It was like her throat had closed up. Charles completely broke down. All the arrogance vanished, only cowardice remained. He collapsed onto the floor, right in front of me. "Mom, I'm sorry, please. I messed up. I'm a terrible son. Please don't kick us out. We have nowhere else to go." He sobbed uncontrollably, tears and snot running down his face, crawling toward me like he was trying to grab my hand. I stepped back, just out of his reach. I looked down at my 6'2" son kneeling at my feet. And strangely, for the first time in my life as a mother, I didn't feel pity. I just felt an endless hollow sadness. "It's too late, Charles." My voice was flat, like ashes after a fire. "An apology can't fix a broken bone. An apology can't fill an empty fridge. And an apology can't buy back trust once it's gone." I looked him straight in the eye. "Now get up, and learn how to take responsibility for what you've done." I turned away, limping toward the window, my back to them. That was the signal. The conversation was over. I didn't want to see them anymore. Behind me, I heard Marie and David politely, but firmly, escorting them out. The soft sobs from Charles, Sophie's muttered curses, the sound of those heavy plastic bags dragging across the floor. And finally, the front door closing. A dry click echoed from the lock. That sound rang through the house, marking the end of a long, painful chapter of my life and the beginning of something new. 6 months later, my life has slowly fallen back into place. I'm gently rocking on a newly built wooden swing on the back porch. In my hands is a hot cup of chamomile tea, its calming scent rising with the steam. My leg has fully healed. The doctor said my bones recovered better than expected. Only sometimes, when the wind picks up, does it ache a little, like a quiet reminder of the past, of the price I paid for freedom. My little garden, once overrun with weeds while I spent my days serving my children, has transformed. It's now bursting with the vibrant colors of velvet red roses and rich purple lavender. The scent of herbs floats in the late afternoon breeze, creating a peace I never knew I needed. I still live on the first floor, in my familiar little space. But the house no longer feels empty or cold. Every now and then, I hear soft footsteps, a quiet laugh, or the gentle hum of jazz drifting down from upstairs. That's where Sarah and Tom, the young couple renting the upper floor, are building a life together. They're wonderful tenants, always greet me in the morning and sometimes bring me fresh fruit. The rent from the 2 upstairs units is enough to comfortably cover all my living expenses. I've repaid every debt, financial and emotional, to the kind neighbors who once helped me. I even have enough left over to hire a cheerful nurse who comes by twice a week to check my blood pressure and help with the heavy lifting in the garden. Every Wednesday morning, Marie and I get dressed up and walk to the senior dance class at the community center. Who would have thought that at 68, I'd discover I have a surprising gift for the waltz? These legs that were once broken now glide smoothly across the wooden floor. As for Charles and Sophie, they still call. At first, it was every day, desperate, pleading calls. Then it tapered off to once a week. They've had to rent a small, cramped apartment on the other side of town, farther from the center and more expensive. Sophie had to go back to work. Charles picked up a second job at night to keep up with their credit card debt. Their calls always start with awkward apologies, promises to change, and sometimes a few veiled complaints about how hard life is without my support. I always listen politely. I never hang up, but I don't feel sorry anymore. I've forgiven them. Not because they deserved forgiveness, but because I deserve peace. Holding on to hatred is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean going back to how things used to be. Our relationship has changed forever. Like a precious porcelain vase that's been shattered, even if you glue it back together with the strongest adhesive, the cracks will always be there. You can look at it, but you can't fill it with water anymore. Do you want me to come by this weekend to help fix the fence? Charles asked, during a recent call, his voice trying to sound helpful. I smiled, looking out at the freshly painted white fence. Thanks, I replied gently but firmly. But Tom already took care of it yesterday. You should spend that time taking care of your own little family. I set my teacup down and watched the honeybees buzz around the blooming flowers. I used to think that unconditional sacrifice was the ultimate measure of a mother's love. I was wrong. I gave so much that I lost myself, turned into something lifeless in the eyes of my children. And in the end, I nearly lost everything, including my life. Now, as I sit under the warm glow of the late afternoon sun, I understand something simple. The greatest legacy a mother can leave her children isn't a big house or a fat bank account. It's the example of a woman who values herself, who loves herself, and who fights to protect her own dignity. Don't sacrifice so much that you lose yourself. A happy, independent mother is the best legacy a child can have. And here, in my own little garden, I've found that happiness. 3 years is long enough for a deep wound to scar over, and long enough for a forgotten seed to grow into a strong tree. I'm standing in my familiar kitchen, but the air here feels different now. There's no smell of greasy smoke from rushed meals cooked to please someone else. Instead, the warm scent of cinnamon, baked apples, and freshly kneaded dough fills the room. Today is Thanksgiving. I open the oven. The heat rushes out, warm and comforting. The golden apple pie inside is bubbling, its crust perfectly crisp. I take it out and place it on the granite countertop. My hands, still marked with old calluses, suddenly feel surprisingly light. Those calluses aren't signs of hard labor anymore. They're proof of work done out of joy. Miss Helen, is the pie ready yet? A bright little voice calls out from the living room. It's Emily, Sarah, and Tom's 3-year-old daughter, the couple renting the upstairs unit. She comes running into the kitchen, her big round eyes fixed on the pie with excitement. I smile, bending down to wipe a bit of flour off her nose. It's ready, you little rascal. But you'll have to wait for it to cool. Sarah walks in behind her, already showing with baby number 2. She gives me a concerned look. Miss Helen, let me help you with that. You've been on your feet all morning. Your leg. My leg's just fine, Sarah. I cut her off gently with a wave of my hand. Besides, I enjoy this. Cooking for people who appreciate it, that's happiness. It's true. That's the biggest difference. Back then, I cooked out of obligation, out of fear of complaints, of Sophie's frowns, or Charles's silence. Now, I cook because I want to. The past 3 years have changed my life in ways 65-year-old Helen never would have dared to dream of. With my savings and the rental income, Marie and I opened a small booth at the local farmers market every weekend. We sell traditional baked goods and homemade fruit preserves. Helen and Marie's kitchen is always busy. I don't do it to make ends meet like I did when I had to sell cornbread to raise my kids. I do it because I love the compliments, love the feel of counting money I earned with joy, and love those afternoons riding around with Marie in our little truck, blasting country music, and laughing like we're 20 again. The doorbell rings. The mood in the kitchen shifts. I know who's at the door. Sarah glances at me, checking to see if I need help. I smile to reassure her, take off my floral apron, and drape it neatly over a chair. I've got it. It's my guest. I walk into the living room, past lush green plants I've cared for with love. I take a deep breath and reach for the doorknob. Charles and Sophie stood there. 3 years had clearly left their mark on their faces, more than on mine. Charles looked noticeably older. His temples were streaked with gray, and worry lines etched deep into his forehead. The beer belly he once had was gone, replaced by the lean, overworked frame of someone who's been through a lot. No more shiny expensive suits, just an old, worn-out wool coat with frayed shoulders. Sophie stood beside him, holding a bottle of wine and a bunch of chrysanthemums. She no longer had that sharp, haughty look she used to carry. Her makeup was lighter, not enough to hide the tiredness in the corners of her eyes. The long, glittery nails she used to flaunt were now cut short and painted a simple nude, practical for work. Word is, she's working as a warehouse manager at a big supermarket, a job that requires heavy lifting and constant inventory checks. "Hi, Mom," Charles said, his voice hoarse and a bit hesitant. He couldn't bring himself to meet my eyes. "Happy Thanksgiving." "Hello, Mrs. Helen," Sophie mumbled, holding out the flowers. I brought these for you." I took the bouquet and gave a soft, polite smile, the kind you give to visitors. "Thank you, both of you. Come inside, it's cold out." I led them into the living room. The house was warm, filled with the sound of Emily's laughter and soft music in the background. Charles paused at the doorway, taking in the home he once grew up in, once looked down on, and was eventually kicked out of. He noticed the new paintings on the walls, the cozy sofa I'd treated myself to last year for my birthday, the sense of life in every corner. A kind of warmth and energy this place never had when they lived here. They sat on the couch, stiff and awkward. Sarah and Tom greeted them politely, then quietly took the baby upstairs, giving us some privacy. "The house looks really nice, Mom," Charles began, wringing his hands. "The garden's much neater than it used to be." "Yeah," I said, sipping my hot tea. "Tom helps me a lot. He's a good young man, hardworking and not afraid to get his hands dirty." Charles lowered his head. That subtle comparison hit his pride like a pinprick, but he didn't dare argue. He knew he had no right to. Sophie glanced at the wine bottle on the table, then said hesitantly, "We're sorry we haven't called much lately. Work's been really busy. Charles has been doing night shifts at the machine shop, and I've been pulling overtime doing inventory." I nodded with understanding. "I get it, making a living isn't easy, especially when you're standing on your own 2 feet, right?" My voice was calm, but the words made Sophie blush. She looked down, fiddling with the hem of her shirt. I remembered her, 3 years ago, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, calling me a burden. Now, life itself had taught her what it meant to carry the real weight of survival. Dinner passed in quiet silence. No yelling, no demands, but also no real warmth. We felt like distant relatives reunited after years apart, carefully choosing our words. Charles ate the roast turkey and apple pie like it was the first proper home-cooked meal he'd had in a long time. I watched my son, and somewhere deep inside, a mother's ache still stirred. But I held back the urge to serve him more or ask if he was short on money. I had already learned the hardest lesson of my life. Blind protection isn't love, it's poison. Letting him face his own struggles was the only way I could respect his late-coming maturity. When dinner was over, Charles and Sophie stood up to leave. Snow had started to fall lightly outside. At the door, Charles suddenly turned around. He looked at me, eyes brimming with tears. "Mom," he said, voice trembling. "Seeing you healthy and happy, it really means a lot to me. Truly." He paused, then continued, his voice softer. "And I'm sorry for everything. The more time I spend out there in the real world, the more I realize how hard you worked to build this home." Sophie stood quietly next to him, giving a small nod. For the first time, I saw no calculation in her eyes, only a late, quiet regret. I stepped forward and placed my hand on Charles's shoulder. He'd lost a lot of weight. "I accept your apology, Charles. I forgave both of you a long time ago. But remember, my forgiveness brings me peace. Fixing your own life is your responsibility. Live it right. That's the only way to make things right." Charles nodded quickly, tears streaming down his cheeks. He moved as if to hug me, then hesitated. I smiled, leaned in, gave him a gentle hug, and let go immediately. A hug of encouragement, not attachment. "Drive safe, okay? Go slow." The door closed behind them. The rumble of Charles's old car faded slowly into the snowy night. I turned back inside. Tom and Sarah were helping clean up the dishes. Aunt Helen, don't worry about this, we've got it, Tom said cheerfully. You were the queen of tonight's party. I laughed out loud. All right. Then the queen will excuse herself to bed early. I headed to my bedroom. It was warm, lit with soft yellow light. I sat down at my old vanity, the place where I kept the most important mementos of my life. I opened the drawer. Next to the savings book and the house deed file sat a small wooden photo frame. Inside the glass wasn't a family picture, not a wedding photo either. It held the $20 bill and the $1 bill from that day, pressed flat, resting silently on black velvet. $21. The price my son once put on his mother's life. I didn't hold on to them to nurture hatred. I kept them like a medal of victory, a permanent reminder of the day I hit rock bottom and how I pulled myself back up, stronger than ever. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back had hair white as snow, deep wrinkles by her eyes and across her forehead. But her eyes were glowing. Gone was the fear, the helplessness of the woman who once lay crying on the floor with a broken leg 3 years ago. These were the eyes of someone who had reclaimed her freedom. I reached out and turned off the light. Outside the window, snow was still falling gently, covering the garden in white. Tomorrow, Marie and I had plans to pick out yarn to knit scarves for the kids at the orphanage. The day after, I'd be teaching a baking class for the women's group at the community center. My life is busy, meaningful, and full of joy. I pulled the blanket up and settled into my soft bed. Some people say old age is the time to rest, to be taken care of by your children. But for me, old age is when life truly begins. I'm no longer Charles's mom or Peter's widow. I am Helen. I'm the owner of the house on Miller Street, and more importantly, I'm the owner of my own life. I closed my eyes and drifted to sleep with a gentle smile on my lips. Tomorrow, the sun will rise again, and I'll greet it on my own 2 strong feet. The story you just heard has been altered in name and location to protect the privacy of those involved. We don't share these stories to judge, but with the hope that someone out there will listen and pause to reflect. How many mothers are quietly suffering in their own homes? I truly wonder. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to speak up and take back your voice? I want to hear your thoughts on this story from Grandma's Secrets, or any feedback that can help us improve. God always blesses us, and I believe with all my heart that courage will lead us to better days. For now, on the ending screen, I'll leave you with 2 of the most beloved stories on this channel. I think they'll surprise you. Thank you for staying with me all the way to this moment. If this story touched your heart, please hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss what's coming next.